We are back, and we are joined now by Erin Reed, independent journalist of the Erin in the Morning Substack / newsletter. Erin, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
So, I wanted to open with well, first, let me ask you, you were at Congress yesterday in the midst of this anti-trans panic over Sarah McBride becoming the first openly trans lawmaker in Congress. What did you observe, and who did you talk to some Democrats? What's the temperature in Washington right now?
Yeah, so my fiance Zoe Zephyr and I, we were in Congress yesterday to talk to people just about what to expect. I've tracked all these bills coming through state houses for the last 4 years now. I know how these debates accelerate and how they develop. And so I just wanted to talk to Democrats about what I was seeing. And I will say that it is wild to be using the bathroom in the Capitol bathroom and to get a notification on my phone that says that I'm not going to be allowed to use the bathroom. It's the same bathroom I've been using for years. We had that notification that Nancy Mace's resolution to ban trans people in the Capitol from bathrooms where it was going to be accepted by Speaker Johnson. That resolution, it impacts so many people because I don't think people understand how many queer or trans or gender nonconforming Capitol workers there are. But there's a lot. There's a lot of staffers. There's a lot of people that don't have, private bathrooms to go to. And so it gets very difficult for them. As far as what I was observing, I spoke to several Democrats. I think that a lot of Democrats do get it. A lot of Democrats do understand the sort of like the vitriol that Sarah McBride is currently seeing and the vitriol that we're seeing from people like Nancy Mace. But that said, I think that there are a contingent of Democrats that are scared of the right wing, and that could potentially be beaten into submission, if you will.
This is where I'll read the first paragraph of your piece in Erin in the Morning from 2 days ago. In a move as predictable as it is outrageous, Republicans have launched a full-blown crusade against the first transgender Congresswoman, Sarah McBride. Representative Nancy Mace has introduced a resolution to ban McBride from using women's bathrooms and locker rooms, a measure that seems to enjoy significant support within the Republican caucus. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has hinted at so-called accommodations that would effectively segregate McBride from public facilities entirely. This uproar comes as some Democrats and pundits toy with the idea of compromising on transgender rights, particularly in areas like sports. Today's events lay bare the folly of such a strategy. There can be no middle ground with those intent on erasing transgender Americans from public life. And I just thought that paragraph almost summed up everything that we need to take away from this story, which is just that, I was on Piers Morgan yesterday debating this topic, and I said to him, oh, so separate but equal, which he bristled at, right? But that's exactly what it is. And okay, Representative McBride, you can use your private bathroom, but what about all of the people that come into the Capitol building every day, the workers that you talk about? I mean, the fear that regular folks just walking, just existing in the Capitol building, needing to use the facilities, are now going to feel because a majority of the majority party in both the Senate and the House has decided, no, human rights, we're going to put a boot on your neck in this regard.
Yes, and I want to make clear that there's a reason why they were targeting Sarah McBride. There's a reason why they focused these bathroom attacks on her. Sarah McBride, for who she is a very moderate, middle of the road Democrat. She's very non-confrontational, not a controversial figure in her own right.
She's pro-Israel, and that's something I would have major disagreements with her on.
Right. And so the reason why they are targeting her is because if Sarah McBride is dangerous in a bathroom, then any trans person is. You can go back to her history. She was responsible for the Paid Family Leave Act in Delaware, which, was helping mothers not go into poverty after a pregnancy. And she's, if she is in a bathroom, somebody who has done things like that, and people are saying that she's dangerous, that she's going to assault fellow congresswomen. Like, we literally had Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene accuse her of potentially assaulting fellow congresswomen whenever they are protecting, somebody who is credibly accused of
Yes.
sexual exploitation of minors. It
Right.
boggles the mind.
It is incredible that in one breath, Nancy Mace can use the fact that she was a victim of rape to justify keeping trans women out of bathrooms, as if inherently trans women are there to rape her or rape other women in a way that, I mean, that's an old trope for LGBTQ people, and I want to explore that a bit more. But it's also just the fact that she is fully supportive of this administration's nominees who are, it's almost as if it's a requirement that you have had to be credibly accused of sexual assault in the past. Many of these Trump appointees have been, and that feels like a message in and of itself as well.
It does. And I think that it just lays bare the hypocrisy here. I don't think that Nancy Mace actually, believes that Sarah McBride is going to assault her in the bathroom. I cannot imagine even considering that, even thinking that. I don't think that it's about sexual assault. It's not about protecting women. You have the Republican Congress people that have been pushing this really heavily. They've been the chief proponents of crackdowns on women's rights. They've been the chief proponents of crackdowns on reproductive health care and on other freedoms that, women want to enjoy. And just because of this, it shows that it's never been about sports. It's never been about bathrooms. It's never been about kids. Like, that's not the purpose of everything that they're doing. They want it to, goad McBride into doing something so that they could kick her out. That was the goal. They don't want her to be there in that room with them. And in fact, last night, Nancy Mace did an interview with Newsmax where I think she finally made clear why she is taking these positions. It's not about sexual assault. It's not about, being scared of Sarah McBride. She says in that interview, this man in a dress thinks he's my equal. He's not, misgendering Sarah McBride. And I just want to make that so clear. It's not about any of that other stuff. It's about the audacity that a transgender person could ever be considered their equal. Sarah McBride was elected by the same number of people that Marjorie Taylor Greene was, the same number of people that Nancy Mace was. She's representing 1 million people from Delaware. She got there just like she did, just like everybody else did.
She did. And Mace using her white female victimhood in this instance, right? You see this when it comes to other targeting of minority groups or traditionally repressed groups, whether it be how many black men were lynched in this country because white women often falsely would accuse black men of sexual assault. We've seen it again in the context of justifying the genocide in Gaza, right? Of how barbaric, according to Israel, Palestinian men are to the pure women on the Israeli side. And then for this, you just see how paper thin it is, and she admits her exact reasoning when she goes on cable news. And what's astounding to me is that there are a lot of liberal commentators who are accepting of this narrative that, whoa, we need to maybe hold off on protecting trans people. You mentioned Zoe Zephyr, obviously somebody who's a hero in this space. But, that was an entirely different reaction when Representative Zephyr of Montana was banned from the House floor for her identity. And that was not too long ago. And there was the Democrats have kind of cowered really since then. And there's no evidence to suggest that they should. The Republicans got wiped out in the 2022 midterms by running on anti-trans ideology. That's not what won this election for Trump. Trump overperformed Republicans. Unfortunately, people kind of like Trump. He's a memeable character, and they voted for him a little bit more than Kamala Harris. But that is it's not a reinforcement of the Republican agenda in any way.
No, and I've seen that reaction as well. And I just want to be clear. I do not believe that transgender people cost Kamala Harris or Democrats at large the election. I think that running away from policy platforms did. I watched during the last election as campaigns floundered and tried to excuse away progressive votes that they had taken on any number of issues, trans people included. I think that kind of politics, it doesn't appear genuine. And Trump exploited that. But he didn't exploit that just with trans people. Like, he exploited that with immigration as well. Andy Bashir, very shortly after the election, came out. And he said that if you try to abandon LGBTQ people in hopes that you're going to somehow win votes and that they're not going to pull this again on you, it's ill-advised. He is from a Republican plus 30 state. He is a Democrat that won in a Republican plus 30 state twice. He won even with the same ads that were being run against Kamala Harris. But you know what Bashir did? He came out strongly supporting all of his votes, and he ran on his values. There was a quote in New York Times. It was he literally stated, "I vetoed numerous anti-LGBTQ bills, and I still beat Trump's handpicked candidate last fall. That happened because even though some voters might disagree with my vetoes, they knew the very next day I'd be announcing new jobs, opening a new health clinic, or finishing a new road that would cut off 20 minutes of their commute. Earning trust and showing people that you care about them also requires that we talk to people like normal human beings and that we're not afraid to share our why." And then he explains his own why. I think that, Bashir gets it. And I think that some Democrats get it too. You're not going to win by offering people Republican light. Like, they're going to take the Republican all day long if their choice is Republican light and the Republican. You're going to win by selling your values. And some Democrats do that very well. Some Democrats are very good at selling the values that progressives and that the Democratic Party should commit to. But others, it seems, especially in this last election, were afraid of their values. They ran away from the votes that they had taken. I saw attacks on Colin Allred. I saw attacks on Sherrod Brown saying, "Oh, you voted for men and women's restrooms." And the actual vote that they took was the Equality Act, like literally a bill that espouses equality under the law for LGBTQ people. And we saw Allred and Sherrod Brown run away from those votes. Like, they just floundered on the debate stage whenever they could not coherently explain their values of equality to other people. And both of them lost, of course. I'll also say, though, that, a lot of these pundits that are trying to blame trans people for the election, they're ignoring probably the state where Democrats capitulated the most on transgender people, and that was New Hampshire, where 16 to 22 Democrats, depending on which bill, because there were multiple anti-trans bills that passed in New Hampshire, voted for those bills. And Republicans gained their largest majority in the New Hampshire House in quite a long time. And so, whenever we see those kinds of reactions, it shows that it's not about trans people. It's not about immigrants. It's about how good you are at selling your values to the American people.
And it reinforces, as you're saying, this idea that what do they stand for, right? The lesson apparently for some of these pundits and Democrats is let's stand for less. No, that was the problem, is that you didn't draw enough of a contrast with Donald Trump. I mean, I think just exceptionalizing him and saying how dangerous he was not enough. People needed to know what you stood for. And what was the theme? What were Democrats really running on this election? It was that the economy's doing pretty good, trust us, even if you're not feeling it. And also, we're going to maintain these institutions that largely you don't like already and that are crushing you. And we're both the party of genocide, but we're also the party of ceasefire, and we're also the party of trans rights, but don't get too crazy about it. Like, what was the message? And this is a case in point, right?
Yeah. So the message was Republicans are right, but we're only going to go halfway as far as them.
Right.
Like, we saw in John, I don't know if you watched John Oliver, but there was a John Oliver segment where he goes over several of the ads that were run, and he's like, these are all Democratic ads. And I mean, you see things like, these immigrants are flooding over the border, and like, they're people like shooting guns and immigrants, and like, it's just all kinds of very right-wing aesthetic type things, and also right-wing values. And I think that, if you're a voter and you see somebody say, "Oh yeah, this other guy's right, but we're just not going to go as far as them," I think that if you are struggling in society and those are the only two options that you get, I understand why people would make that decision.
It's plain politics. It's drawing a contrast with your opposition. It's not like
Exactly.
that difficult to do, I think, and be moral and stand up for the right things at the same time. And I'm curious about if you could explain why Republicans are so obsessed with sexualizing the bathroom. Like, I gotta be honest, I think the last thing most people want to do in a public restroom is have sex. Is it tapping into tropes, homophobic tropes from the past? Because sometimes that was a place where folks could meet, including some former Republican congressmen, but we don't need to talk about that right now. Like, that part of it is very bizarre to me.
Yeah, so, it's rhetorical. I think that we've seen this kind of rhetoric used against many minorities in the past, that people are unsafe in bathrooms. We've seen it used against lesbians in the past in locker rooms. That was a really common trope in the 1980s. We've seen it used against gay teachers in the 1970s, whenever there was a mass banning of gay teachers in several states. We've seen it used against other minorities. We've seen it used against immigrants. We've seen it used against Black people. We've seen it used against lots of different groups of people. And so I think that, it's not a genuine position. The genuine position is they want to eradicate trans people from public life. And if you're going to do that, the best way to do that is making it hard to travel, is making it hard to go to the bathroom. I know trans people in places like Texas where they currently have a bounty in some cities. In Odessa, Texas, if you catch a trans person in the bathroom, you can sue them for $10,000. And it's going to be hard for you to leave your home and go somewhere. I know people that have to map out the Starbucks on their routes, just so that way they know where there are gender neutral restrooms that they can go to, because they're scared. It's dangerous in some places. This was actually, this has been used before to control cisgender women. They used to call it the urinary elation. It's that there were not as many public bathrooms for women as there were men, and that kept women in the home more often. And this was like a tactic that was used a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, and the mechanism for that Texas law is basically identical to the abortion bounty. If you aid and abet an abortion in that state, it's the same mechanism, which is just like, it shows how old this stuff goes and and how far back it goes. What should we be expecting for the next 4 years on this issue? It's going to be there's going to be a lot of suffering. But I guess there will be cracks where we can push back and resist. I just am curious what you think the kind of the first order crackdowns are going to be from this anti-trans administration and across the country with other Republican leadership.
Yeah, I've been tracking this legislation for a long time. I have a very good idea of how it's going to progress from here. And I've had conversations with, Democratic congressmen. I kind of have an idea on what we're going to see first. What I can say is that the very first thing that we're going to see are executive orders from Trump. And those are going to come on day one. And I anticipate that they're going to do a lot. We're going to have a military ban on day one for trans people. That's absolutely coming down the wire. I know many trans people in the military that are already preparing. And I've heard that the EOs are already drafted up for that. We're also likely going to see federal investigations on medical organizations like the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Trump has already said that that's going to happen, and he's putting people in place that would do that. For instance, if Matt Gaetz somehow gets through like a recess nomination or something like that, Matt Gaetz has already, sided with Trump on these sorts of investigations over transgender care. And we might see, for instance, I know that there's talk about putting Dr. Latipo from Florida, in a major position of power in the government. I know that they're thinking about him taking the
Can you
assistant.
explain who he is, by the way, for our audience?
Yeah, so Dr. Latipo is one of the primary sources of importing some of the worst anti-trans stuff into the United States and also exporting it abroad. He is in Florida. He's under DeSantis. He is the Surgeon General of Florida. And he essentially, had research. He conducted research over trans care that was actually not research that he conducted. It was they had this PowerPoint from a court case that showed that the end goal was to ban all gender affirming care before the research was even done. And so then he established the research with that end goal in mind. He basically put all the findings in there that would allow him to ban transgender care. And I want to really put the point on this. Dr. Latipo is responsible for an adult gender-affirming care ban in Florida. It has meant that 80% of transgender adults could not obtain their care in Florida. He also is a major anti-vaxxer. He has issued a guideline to all doctors to not vaccinate people over the age of 65, for instance. It's horrifying what Dr. Latipo is going to do in the United States government if he's given a position. And this guy has been sued by the ACLU numerous times. He's got numerous cases against him right now over how he handles medical care, especially transgender care. And so, yeah, these are people that we are seeing potentially put into the government. The other thing I think we're going to see really quickly are crackdowns on bathrooms, crackdowns on IDs. We know, for instance, that Nancy Mace has drafted a second resolution that says that trans people will be banned from bathrooms in all federally owned properties. And I want to make it clear what that means. That is national parks. That is any building, any federal building, federal courthouses. That is also the Dulles and Reagan Airport, which is one of the main airports that, people fly through. And so, there's a lot of things that we're likely to see really, really quickly. I also do think that we're going to get some level of a gender affirming care ban for not just trans youth, but for many trans adults as well.
I mean, and that doesn't even need to be done through Congress. Basically, if Trump wants to essentially threaten the states, he can probably do so with his executive authority via the Attorney General or other enforcement bodies. That seems like he could easily do that without needing Congress whatsoever.
Yeah, so you're not going to be necessarily safe if you're in a blue state. And I know that some blue states are pushing back. Like, for instance, we've seen Gavin Newsom call a special session of the California legislature to try to put in as many protections against federal overreach as possible. But what we are expected to see, I think that we are going to see, for instance, Trump threatened to pull funding from public schools in blue states that support transgender people. They're going to argue that Title IX requires that you discriminate against transgender people in bathrooms, whereas it's been interpreted to protect transgender people in bathrooms. We've seen Glenn Youngkin in Virginia do this as well.
Any tips in terms of trans folks that are watching this who are obviously quite scared right now, I would imagine, about making sure that they have their medication that's available to them, that other care is available to them? What would you recommend as the best you can?
Yeah, so I wrote an article on this where I go through a series of guidelines that I recommend to all transgender people. And then the top recommendation is that you get your passport or you update your passport. And the reason for that is not because I'm telling people that they're going to have to flee the country. It's been misinterpreted to be that way. The reason I'm actually saying this is because your federal passport is one of the only documents that lasts 10 years that you can easily change your gender marker on right now. And so if you can get a federal document that has your correct gender marker on it, that could be good for 10 years. You could be good for a couple of administrations. And that's going to get a lot of people, I think, out of some immediate trouble. I also recommend that people update their state documents immediately and make sure that they are going to last through the administration. That way, if they get revoked, if we get a guideline from Trump saying that all states have to issue state IDs that don't match your gender identity, you can go ahead and push back on that. So I recommend those two things. I also recommend that, if you are on medication, if you are taking estrogen or testosterone, talk to your doctors about ways to make that last longer. I know that some doctors, for instance, have advised their patients that they can use their vials for a little longer. I also recommend that people that are thinking about moving, that are putting those plans in place to move, now would be the time to start considering acting on those. I'm not going to suggest that everybody move because A, not everybody can, and B, not everybody wants to. A lot of people want to stay home to fight in their home states. However, many people are making the decision that they're going to be a little bit safer in a place like, California or Colorado or any of the other states that protect transgender care. And if that is your calculus, I would start at least making those considerations for whenever we see day one from the Trump administration.
Erin Reed, Erin in the Morning is the newsletter Substack. Subscribe for all news on this front. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.